Welcome back to the Introduction to Philosophy and Ethics, PHIL 2103 online. In this lecture, I want to take a look at the divine command theory and natural law in just a little bit deeper, with a little bit deeper focus. Now, again, the divine command theory states that the ultimate moral foundation is God's commands, or a God. When we look at it through a Christian lens, it is God's commands as found in Scripture. This is found in Judaism, Islam, Neo-Orthodoxy, and many ancient polytheistic religions. So this is not strictly a Christian ethic. In fact, as you noted from the last video, the Christian ethic is based on God's character from which His commands flow, not just His commands by themselves. Now, in divine command theory, there is a problem that develops. This is called the Euthyphro. The Euthyphro states, or asks rather, does God, God with a little g, or the gods, command things because they are good, or are they good because God commands them? Now this becomes a logical problem, because if things are good outside of God, if they're inherently good, then that means that God must look to or look behind Himself and say, what things are automatically good? What things must I pull from? Which means that those good things or those morals are superior or prior to God. Well, then the other side of the equation looks at this and says, are things good because God commands them? Well, does that mean that God could command things that we consider to be evil? If God were to say that it is now right for you to kill each other, would that be considered good? And so this Euthyphro problem becomes a real issue, because we must look at the two sides and say, are things good pre-existing before God, or are they good because God commands them? If so, could God command things other than what we see as good? Because if things are good because God commands them, then He could command what we consider to be bad or evil things. And if God commands things that are good, then good exists logically prior to God. God, however, as we understand Him in the Christian view, is prevented from acting outside of His own character. The character of God flows through the commands that He gives. And what is good is not determined on a pre-existing set, but through His own character. So let's talk about a few problems with the divine command theory. First of all, calling God good presupposes a prior notion of goodness that must be independent of God and religion, as in the Euthyphro. Secondly, apparent conflicts between scriptures become problematic. So for example, look at the stories of Rahab or Tamar in the Bible. Now Rahab was a prostitute, but yet she made a good action in protecting some spies, and that action was lying to someone else to protect them. So she is a prostitute who has lied, and yet she is included in the genealogy of Jesus Christ as a righteous person. How do we understand that apparent conflict? Or take a historical example, like the story of Corrie ten Boom. Now, Corrie ten Boom protected some Jewish individuals during World War II when the Nazis were coming to seek and murder, essentially, these people. She hid them in a spot underneath the stairs, and then when these Nazis came to her and said, do you have any Jews here? She had to lie. So which was the more proper action? Did she hold to a lie, which is wrong, to save lives, which would be a utilitarian viewpoint? Or must she always uphold the truth and pray that God does the right thing? And so she tells the truth. She tells the Nazis, yes, I'm hiding some, go get them. And then they perhaps go and die. So we have to look at these apparent conflicts in Scripture. So there are three solutions then to looking at these conflicts that come into the biblical commands. The first is to maintain that no conflict actually faces the believer. This is called non-conflicting absolutism, and it relies on the proper interpretation of Scriptures. That would say that no problems or conflicts will actually exist if we understand Scripture in a proper lens. The second solution is to admit that a real moral conflict exists, but to say that sin is still sin. That is to say, Corrie ten Boom had a problem. She either had to lie or she had to be an accomplice to murder. Both of those were reality, but both were still sin in one way or another. And the third option is called graded absolutism, or it's also known as hierarchicalism. It says that moral conflicts are real due to our fallen, sinful world, but the option chosen is not necessarily sin. So because Corrie ten Boom held to the greater loving option, that may not have necessarily been sin. So for example, or another example, God's command to preach the gospel was over the command to be in submission to authorities. So in the New Testament, when it was considered illegal to preach the gospel, the New Testament authors and the New Testament, the people who lived in those New Testament times, they went and preached the gospel in spite of this command that they should bow down to authorities. And it was considered the right thing to do. Now let's switch gears and talk about the natural law. Natural law refers to the general, objective, and widely shared moral values that are not tied specifically to the special revelation in Scripture. Now, this is something that you would see presented in Scripture. It says that even without a divine revelation, you still have the natural law so that you are without excuse. You can still look out and observe the way nature works. So, for example, in Roman Catholicism, it indicates a specific moral rule that is tied to what is natural in creation. So in Roman Catholicism, it is wrong to use birth control because that is not part of the natural law. In nature, you do not see animals or even human beings in their natural state able to prevent when they are pregnant outside of abstinence. Natural law refers to an ethic that is transcendent and is not in human creation. Even if it is not viewed through the Christian lens, it would still be Mother Nature's way or evolutionary way of seeing things. But through the Christian lens, it's specifically tied to God's transcendent understanding of the way life should work. It also asks, or natural law also asks, what can be known apart from special revelation? What can we know aside from the commands of God? God did not speak holistically on every area of life. And so when we look outside and see the way things work, we understand a general revelation of what God has for us. It also asks if people can be good outside of the special grace of God. Are we totally depraved and deprived? Can we not act with goodness in ourselves outside of the grace of God? Or is there a natural ability for us and for creation to be good without God? Natural law seeks what ground may exist between Christian and non-Christian morality. Truth, as we understand it, is an aspect of God's nature. Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. Which means that all truth that is found, even if it is apart from this special revelation of Scripture, can still be a part of who God is, because God is the overarching creator. He created everything. And so when we see general revelation through the natural law, we are still becoming to understand who God is.